The pod should not have had a heartbeat. That was the first thing the scanner flagged, and the first thing Salvage Captain Vess Dran refused to believe. She stood in the gutted cargo hold of the ISS Caldera, an ancient human warship that had drifted through dead space for 2 centuries, and stared at the reading on her wrist display like it might correct itself if she looked hard enough. It didn't. "Run it again," she said. Her engineer, a lean Krillian named Dask, with plating the color of rust, didn't look up from the console. "I've run it 4 times, Captain. Same result every time. Something in that pod is alive." Around them, the caldera groaned like an old wound reopening. Its corridors were choked with frost and silence, the kind of silence that came from a ship that had died mid-scream. Vess had boarded 100 wrecks in her career, human and otherwise, and none of them had ever felt like this. Watched, somehow, as if the ship remembered they were trespassing. The pod sat at the center of the hold, half buried under collapsed bulkhead plating, its surface etched with a language Vess only recognized from history archives. English, old and blocky, stenciled beside a symbol that made her spine go cold. A single word. Commander. Every child in Dominion space grew up on the story of humanity's extinction. Earth burned, its fleet scattered and destroyed, its people erased from the galaxy 200 years ago in a war so total that even the survivors' names had been lost. It was history. Settled. Safe. Except the thing in front of her was breathing. "Captain," Dask said carefully, "regulation states any human artifact above Threat Class 3 gets reported to Dominion Command before—" "I know what regulation states." Vess crouched beside the pod, running her palm along its frost-slick surface. Faint light pulsed beneath the glass, slow and rhythmic, like something counting down to a moment it had waited 200 years to reach. "Get me a manual override." "Captain?" "That's an order." Dask hesitated, then moved. He always moved, eventually. That was why she'd kept him on her crew for 6 years, he argued, but he never let her walk into danger alone. The override took 11 minutes. 11 minutes of the ship creaking around them, of frost sublimating off ancient pipes in slow, ghostly breaths, of Vess's own heartbeat climbing louder than she liked to admit. When the seal finally hissed and cracked, cold vapor rolled out across the deck in a wave, and for one suspended second, nothing happened at all. Then the eyes opened. They were human eyes. She'd seen images, recordings, dry historical footage of a species that no longer existed, but nothing had prepared her for the weight behind them. They were dark, alert, and utterly awake, snapping into focus on her face with a clarity that belonged to a man who had never been asleep at all, only waiting. He didn't gasp. He didn't struggle. He simply looked at her, at the alien plating on her armor, at the unfamiliar Dominion insignia stitched into her collar, and something in his expression sharpened into calculation, fast and cold. "Where?" he said, voice a broken rasp from 2 centuries of disuse. "Is my fleet?" Vess had no answer. Before she could try to form one, alarms tore through the caldera, red light flooding the hold from systems that had no business still having power. Dask stumbled back from his console, staring at readouts that made no sense. "Captain, the ship, it's not us. Something's activating the internal grid. Weapons systems, propulsion, all of it, it's coming online on its own." The man in the pod tried to rise, armor plates grinding as 200 years of dormant machinery fought to remember how to move. And Vess caught a fractured word from his lips before his strength gave out, and he collapsed back against the frost. A name, sharp and final, spoken like a password to something enormous. Solvane. Dask went pale. "Captain, that name, that's flagged. That's flagged at the highest level in the historical archive. Dominion intelligence marked it centuries ago as," he swallowed, "as the single most dangerous designation in the human war record." Vess looked down at the unconscious man in her arms, at wounds along his ribs that were impossibly closing themselves as she watched, threads of tissue knitting shut in real time like his body refused to accept that its war was over. Whatever the Dominion's archives said about the extinction of humanity, Whatever comforting, tidy history every child had been raised on, none of it explained a man who woke up breathing after 200 years, who spoke a name that made her engineer's voice shake, and whose ship had just begun arming itself for a battle nobody else knew was coming. "Comms," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Anyone hear that distress ping when we boarded?" Dask checked, and his expression twisted with something close to fear. "It wasn't a distress ping, Captain. It was outgoing. The moment his pod cracked open, this ship sent a transmission. Encrypted. Directional." He turned the display toward her, and the coordinates on it meant nothing to Vess, except that they were aimed, with total precision, at the heart of Dominion-controlled space. Whoever, whatever, Commander Solvane had been 200 years ago, something aboard this ship had just told the galaxy he was awake, and far across the void, in a listening post buried deep inside Dominion territory, an alarm no one had expected to ever hear again began quietly, patiently, to ring. Vess didn't know it yet, but she had just made the single most dangerous decision of her career, and there would be no undoing it. She hauled the man's weight against her shoulder, alarms still screaming through the dead ship around them, and made a choice that broke 6 different Dominion regulations at once. "We're not reporting this," she said. Dask stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had, but there was something about the way the stranger's hand had curled, even unconscious, even broken, into the shape of a fist around a weapon that wasn't there anymore, that told her this was no ordinary salvage. She had come looking for scrap metal and forgotten war relics. She had found a soldier who refused to stay dead, a ship that remembered how to fight, and a signal already racing across the stars toward someone who would very much want him buried again. Permanently, this time. The frost from the shattered pod still curled across the floor when the first tremor rocked the hull, distant but unmistakable. Something enormous, moving fast, and already changing course toward their position. Whoever received that transmission wasn't waiting to ask questions. Vess looked down at the unconscious commander in her arms, at the strange machinery of the ship still humming back to life around them like a heartbeat restarting after 200 years, and understood, with a cold certainty that settled deep in her chest, that she had not stumbled onto history. She had stumbled onto something that history had tried very hard to bury, and it was only just beginning to wake up. His pulse should not have been climbing back toward normal in under an hour. That was what the medical scanner insisted, its readout blinking a soft, disbelieving amber above the cot where the stranger lay. Vess watched the numbers rise, watched wounds that had looked days old an hour ago now scar over into faint pale lines, and felt the same unease she'd carried since the moment his eyes had opened in that frozen hold. "He shouldn't be healing this fast," Dask muttered, hovering by the medbay door like he expected the man to lunge upright at any second. Nothing organic heals this fast without augmentation, and there's no augmentation showing on the scan. It's like his body just remembers how to survive. Vess didn't answer. She was watching the stranger's face, the tension in it, even in unconsciousness, like some part of him refused to fully rest even now. He woke an hour later without warning, no gradual stirring, no confusion, just awareness, all at once, the way a soldier wakes when a threat is near. His eyes found Vess first, then swept the room, cataloging exits, weapons, distances, before finally settling back on her. "You pulled me out," he said. His voice was steadier now, rough but clear. "Why? Would you have preferred I left you frozen?" Something almost like a humorless smile touched his mouth. "Depends what year it is." Vess hesitated, then told him. Watched the number land on him like a physical blow, watched something behind his eyes go very still and very far away. 200 years. He said nothing for a long moment, jaw tight, hands curling slowly into fists at his sides. "Earth," he said finally. "What happened to Earth?" This was the part Vess had been dreading. She'd grown up on the official record, same as everyone. Humanity's homeworld burned in the final campaign, its fleets annihilated, its people wiped from the galaxy in an event so complete that not even Dominion war archives kept detailed records past a certain date. Extinction. Absolute and unchallenged. She told him plainly, because she suspected he'd know a lie the moment he heard one. He didn't react the way she expected. No grief, no denial. Just a slow, considering silence. The look of a tactician turning a claim over and over, searching for the seam where it didn't fit. "No," he said at last. "No? That's not what happened." He swung his legs off the cot, testing weight on limbs that had been frozen for 2 centuries, and didn't so much as wince. "I was there for the end of that war. We were losing ground, yes. We were dying, yes. But we weren't finished. Command doesn't seal a commander into cryostasis with a live extraction signal, unless there's something left worth extracting him for." Vess felt the floor of her certainty shift. "You're telling me the official record is wrong." "I'm telling you the official record was written by whoever won." His eyes cut to her, sharp and assessing. "And whoever wrote it clearly didn't want anyone finding this ship." Before she could respond, Dask's voice crackled urgently over the comm. "Captain, you need to see this. Now." They found him in the Caldera's cramped command deck, standing before a console that had, impossibly, come alive on its own. The same system that had triggered during the pod's opening. Dask gestured at the screen, hands unsteady. "The ship's black box. It's been dormant for 2 centuries, completely dead, no power signature at all. Then 30 seconds ago it just switched on, started playing a stored transmission log." He glanced at the stranger. "I think it's responding to him. To his neural signature maybe, or some kind of command authorization built into the hardware." The stranger crossed the deck without hesitation, fingers finding the console's controls with the ease of long-buried muscle memory. A garbled recording crackled to life, distorted by 200 years of decay. But the voice underneath it was unmistakably his own, sharper, harder, spoken in the final hours of some desperate, unrecorded battle. "Solvane to all remaining commands. This is not a retreat. This is a redeployment. Do you understand me? We are not finished. Haven is still—" The recording cut to static. The room went very quiet. "That transmission," Vess said slowly, "is time-stamped after the date humanity was declared extinct." The stranger, Solvane, she made herself think, because a name was easier to hold on to than the shape of everything unraveling around her, stared at the frozen readout like it was the first solid ground he'd stood on since waking. "Someone erased the truth," he said, "and buried me along with it." Before anyone could speak further, Dask's console let out a sharp, urgent chime, and his face drained of color as he read the incoming data. "Captain, we have a problem. A Dominion inspection fleet just altered course. 5 ships, heavy cruisers moving directly toward our position, and their trajectory is too precise to be routine. They're not searching. They already know exactly where we are." Solvane's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, settled, the readiness of a man stepping back into a role he'd never truly left. "That transmission the ship sent when I woke," he said. "Who did it go to?" "We don't know," Vess admitted. "The signal was encrypted, directional, aimed somewhere deep inside Dominion territory. We couldn't trace the destination. Then someone on the other end already knows exactly who I am." Solvane's gaze fixed on the approaching fleet icons crawling steadily closer on the display, his voice dropping into something flat and certain. "And they're not sending an inspection team to ask questions. They're sending it to make sure I go back to sleep. Permanently." The console beneath his hand let out a low, resonant hum, ancient weapons systems drawing power from somewhere deep in the Caldera's dying reactor, as if the ship itself understood the danger closing in and was, after 200 silent years, finally ready to fight again. Outside the viewport, the 5 Dominion cruisers dropped out of long-range sensor haze and into open space, their formation tightening with the cold precision of ships that had done this before. Vess's throat went dry. "Solvane, those aren't standard inspection vessels." He didn't look away from the display. "No," he agreed quietly. "They're not." And on the black box beside them, One final fragment of the ancient recording flickered back to life, unprompted, playing a single line in his own younger voice. A line that would haunt Vess for the rest of the night because it meant the danger closing in on them wasn't new. It had been waiting 200 years for him to wake up. "If you're hearing this," the recording said, "it means they found me before I found them. Do not trust the ones who come first." The lead cruiser's weapons bay doors slid open. The first shot missed them by less than 100 meters, close enough that the Caldera's hull screamed under the shockwave. "They're not hailing us," Dask shouted over the alarms, gripping his console as the deck tilted hard beneath them. "No warning, no demand for surrender. They went straight to weapons fire." Solvane was already moving, dropping into the command chair like it had been carved for him 200 years ago and never once forgotten his shape. His hands found controls that should have meant nothing to him, ancient interfaces buried under decades of dust, and yet he read them instantly, fluently, like a language that had never left his blood. "Evasive, 40-degree pitch now," he snapped, and Vess didn't question him. She threw the ship into the turn herself, and the second volley of cruiser fire tore through empty space where they'd been a heartbeat earlier. "How is this old wreck still capable of that maneuver?" Dask breathed, disbelieving even as he confirmed the systems held. "Because it was built to outlast people who wanted it dead," Solvane said grimly. "Same as I was." They limped the Caldera into the ragged edge of an unclaimed debris field, using the wreckage of long-dead colony freighters as cover, while the Dominion cruisers fanned out to search. In the sudden quiet, Vess turned on Solvane, adrenaline and fear sharpening her voice into something close to anger. "You said someone would come to make sure you stayed dead. You didn't say it would be an entire Dominion strike group. Who are you, really?" He met her eyes without flinching. "I already told you. The last active commander of Earth's defense fleet." "That's not an answer. That's a title." She stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated by the sheer stillness radiating off him. "Titles don't explain why 5 cruisers just tried to erase this ship from existence the moment you opened your eyes." For a long moment, Solvane said nothing, and Vess thought he might simply refuse again, the way he had every question about the war so far. Then something in his expression cracked, just slightly, the weight of 2 centuries pressing through. "Because I know something they need buried," he said quietly. "Humanity wasn't destroyed in open battle. We weren't wiped out fighting to the last ship, the way your history claims. We were betrayed, boxed in, cut off from supply and reinforcement, systematically silenced by something inside our own command structure." The words settled over the bridge like a physical weight. Dask stared at him, plating faintly trembling. Vess felt something cold slide down her spine. "Silenced how?" "I was leading the final defense of an evacuation fleet," Solvane continued, voice low and controlled, the way a man speaks when reciting a wound he's replayed 1,000 times. "Not a retreat, a calculated extraction. The last surviving human civilians, scientists, children, moved to a hidden colony beyond Dominion reach. We called it Haven. My ship was meant to hold the line long enough for the fleet to jump clear." He paused. "We held the line, and then someone gave our position away. Who? I don't know. I was sealed into stasis moments before my ship lost contact with everyone. My last order was to wait for an extraction signal that would come once it was safe. It never came. Not until your crew cracked open that pod." His jaw tightened. 200 years of silence, and I don't know if it's because Haven fell or because it's still out there, still hiding, still waiting for a rescue that never arrived. Vess sat with that for a moment, the sheer scale of it settling uneasily against everything she'd been taught to believe. If even a fraction of what he was saying was true, an entire species hadn't gone extinct. It had gone into hiding, and someone with enormous reach had spent 2 centuries making sure the galaxy never found out. "I need to check something," she said abruptly, moving to the ship's secondary archive terminal, one of the few systems original to the Dominion refit rather than the ancient human hardware. She pulled up her own family service record on instinct, a habit from her early Fleet Academy days, intending only to cross-reference dates, What she found made her blood run cold. Entire sections were missing. Not corrupted, not degraded by time, deliberately excised, clean gaps in the record where names and postings should have been, dated to the exact final years of the human war. Including, she realized with a jolt, references to her own great-grandmother's unit, a support division that official history insisted had never crossed paths with human forces at all. Someone rewrote this, she said slowly. Not just human history, Dominion history too. Someone went back and erased connections between the two. Sylvain's eyes sharpened on her. You had family in that war. I don't know anymore what I had, Vess admitted, and for the first time since pulling him from that pod, she understood this wasn't only his fight. Something buried in her own bloodline had been quietly scrubbed from existence, and whoever had done it was thorough enough, patient enough, powerful enough to still be actively defending that secret 2 centuries later. Dask's console erupted with a fresh proximity alert before either of them could process it further. Captain, they found us, all 5 cruisers converging on our position, and I'm reading a 6th signature just entered the system. Bigger, command class. On the display, a new ship dropped out of long-range sensor shadow, dwarfing the cruisers around it, its hull marked with an insignia none of them recognized. Not standard Dominion military, but something older, more restricted, deliberately unfamiliar. That's not a Dominion fleet marking, Dask said, voice tight with dawning dread. I'm cross-referencing now. There's nothing on record. It's like the ship doesn't officially exist. Sylvain went very still, staring at the insignia with an expression Vess hadn't seen on him yet. Not fear exactly, but recognition, cold and unwelcome. I know that mark, he said quietly. I saw it once, right before Haven's location was compromised. It belonged to the ones who betrayed us. The command-class vessel's weapons array began charging. A slow building glow visible even at this distance, and every remaining defense system aboard the Caldera strained to draw power it barely had left. They didn't come to capture you, Vess realized, horror dawning. They came to make absolutely sure this ship and everything on it never surfaces again. Sylvain's hands tightened on the controls. Then we give them a reason to regret waking me up. The debris field lit up as the first true volley tore toward them, and somewhere in the chaos, the Caldera's ancient systems screamed a warning neither Vess nor Dask fully understood. A targeting lock, not on their hull, but on something buried deep inside Sylvain's own frozen memories. Something the enemy fleet seemed to want retrieved as badly as it wanted them dead. The nebula swallowed them whole, and for a moment Vess thought it might actually save their lives. Into the mineral cloud, Sylvain ordered, already redirecting what little power the Caldera had left into its forward shielding. Their sensors will scatter in there, ours will too, but we know this ship, they don't. Vess didn't argue. She threw the wounded vessel into the churning red haze of ionized gas and debris, the command-class ship and its 5 cruisers falling in behind them like wolves that refused to lose the scent. Inside the nebula, visibility dropped to nothing and the Caldera's hull groaned under stray impacts from drifting rock and frozen mineral fragments. Captain, I'm reading their formation splitting, Dask called out, sweat beading along his jaw plates. They're trying to box us in from 3 approach vectors. Sylvain's hands moved across the console with unnerving calm, and Vess realized watching him that whatever fear lived in him had been folded away somewhere she couldn't see, replaced entirely by the cold clarity of a man doing the only thing he had ever been built to do. Cut engines on my mark, he said. Let momentum carry us into that debris cluster ahead. When the lead cruiser follows, we use the wreckage as a blind and come around behind them. That's insane, Dask said. We'll be running silent in the middle of their formation. Yes, Sylvain agreed. That's the idea. It worked with a precision that left both Vess and Dask stunned. The Caldera went dark and drifted, indistinguishable from the debris around it, while the lead cruiser barreled past in pursuit of a target that was no longer where its sensors expected. Sylvain brought engines back online at the last possible second, spinning them into the cruiser's blind spot, and unleash the ship's remaining weapons batteries into its unshielded flank. The cruiser lurched, crippled, tumbling off into the nebula's churning haze. "One down," Sylvain said without a trace of triumph, already recalculating the positions of the remaining 4. "The command ship will adjust. It's the only one among them thinking, not just following orders." Vess found herself staring at him for a beat too long. This man who had woken from 2 centuries of frozen sleep and, within hours, was single-handedly outmaneuvering a modern Dominion strike group with instincts that predated most of their technology. It should have been impossible. It wasn't. "How are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Because I've done it before," Sylvain said. "Too many times. This isn't skill, Captain. It's scar tissue." Before she could respond, a new signal cut through the chaos of the nebula, faint and fractured, buried under layers of interference, but unmistakably structured, deliberate, a pattern that made Sylvain's entire body go rigid. "That's a distress call," he said, voice suddenly taut. "Coded. Old cipher, pre-war military encryption. Nobody outside human command should even know that format exists." Dask scrambled to isolate the signal, hands shaking slightly as the decrypted fragments scrolled across his display. "Captain, this isn't coming from anywhere near us. It's old. Extremely old. Looped and retransmitted across who knows how many relay points to still be reaching us now. But the coordinates embedded in it." "Show me," Sylvain said. The moment the star chart populated, something shifted behind his eyes, raw and unguarded in a way Vess hadn't seen from him yet. Recognition. Grief. Something dangerously close to hope. "Haven," he whispered. "You know that location?" "I buried it," Sylvain said. "In my own memory. Encrypted the same way this signal is. Only a handful of commanders ever knew those coordinates, and I made sure of that myself, because if the wrong people ever got them..." He stopped, jaw tightening. "This shouldn't be broadcasting. Haven was built to stay silent forever unless there was no other choice left." "Then someone down there is in trouble," Vess said. "Or someone is still alive to send it at all." Sylvain didn't answer immediately. His hand hovered over the navigation controls, and for the first time since she'd pulled him from that frozen pod, Vess saw something in him falter. Not tactical hesitation, but something rawer, older, buried far deeper than strategy. "I was supposed to reach that fleet," he said finally, quiet enough that she almost didn't hear it over the ship's groaning hull. "Before my ship went dark, before I was sealed into stasis, my final order was to get Haven's evacuation fleet clear and follow behind them. I never made it. I don't know if they made it either." He exhaled slowly, and for a moment the weight of 200 years pressed visibly onto his shoulders. "I don't know if I'm chasing a rescue, Captain, or chasing a grave I already dug 2 centuries ago." Vess had no answer for that kind of grief, not one that would mean anything. So instead she said the only thing that felt true. "Then we find out. Together." Something eased, fractionally, in the hard line of his jaw. He gave a single nod, and set the caldera on a new heading deeper into the nebula, chasing a 200-year-old promise toward coordinates that might hold salvation, or might hold nothing but silence and bones. They didn't get far. The nebula's haze thinned abruptly ahead of them, parting around a massive shape that had been waiting. Engines dark, sensors patient, exactly where their new course would carry them. A strike carrier, larger and far more advanced than anything in the pursuing formation behind them, decloaked directly in their path with the unhurried confidence of a predator that had never once doubted where its prey would run. Dask's voice cracked with alarm. "Captain, that's not part of the group chasing us. This thing's been sitting here the whole time, waiting." A comm channel opened without request, forced through their systems by a signal far stronger than their own, and a voice filled the bridge, calm, measured, and, to Vess's shock, achingly familiar to the man beside her. Sylvain's whole body went rigid, color draining from his face as if he were staring at a ghost given form. "Hello, Arik," the voice said, warm in a way that made the hair on Vess's arms rise. "It's been a long sleep. I was starting to wonder if you'd ever come find me." Sylvain's hands curled into fists on the console, his voice a raw, disbelieving whisper. That's impossible. You died at my side 200 years ago. The strike carrier's running lights blazed to life across its hull, weapons batteries rotating with slow, deliberate menace toward the Caldera's crippled frame, and the voice on the other end of the channel laughed softly, sending a chill through every person on the bridge. Did I? She said. Or did you simply never ask what happened to me after you fell asleep? Her name hit the bridge like a second impact. Celine, Sylvain said, the word torn out of him, half accusation, half disbelief. Thorn. You remember, the voice replied, almost fond, almost sad. Good. I was afraid 200 years might have blurred the details. Vess watched the man beside her, the same commander who had, minutes ago, outmaneuvered 5 warships with icy, unshakable precision, go utterly still, staring at the comm display like it had reached into his chest and closed a fist around something vital. You died, Sylvain said again, quieter this time, like saying it enough might make it true. I watched the hull breach. I watched your section of the ship go dark. You watched a section of the ship go dark, Celine corrected gently. You didn't watch me die. There's a difference, Auric, and it's the difference that's kept me alive for 2 centuries while you slept through every single one of them. Dask's hands hovered uselessly over his console, unsure whether to arm weapons or brace for annihilation, caught in the gravity of a conversation he barely understood. Vess understood only pieces of it herself, but she understood enough. This wasn't a stranger commanding that strike carrier. This was someone who had once stood at Sylvain's side, close enough that his voice cracked at the sound of her. Let us go, Celine, Sylvain said. Whatever you've become, whatever they made you into, let this ship go. I can't do that, she said, and for the first time real weight entered her voice, stripped of the earlier warmth. Because you're about to undo 200 years of careful necessary work, and I won't let you burn down everything I built to keep what's left of us alive. What's left of us, Sylvain repeated slowly. You knew. You knew Haven survived. A long pause stretched across the channel before Celine answered. I made sure it survived, she said. You want to know the truth you've been chasing since you woke up, Auric? Fine. I'll give it to you because you were always going to find it eventually, and I'd rather you hear it from me than from a corpse in some directive archive. She exhaled, and even through the calm, it sounded exhausted, centuries old. The war was already lost. Not close to lost. Finished. Dominion Command had the evacuation fleet's location before we ever reached the rendezvous point. You were leading survivors into a trap, Auric, and there was nothing left to do but choose which kind of ending we got. So you handed them over, he said, voice flat with dawning horror. I handed over a location, Celine said, in exchange for a guarantee. Total surrender, full record sealed, no further pursuit of the survivors. In exchange for Haven's existence being permanently classified and protected under directive authority. I didn't sell out our people, Auric. I saved them. Every single person on that fleet is alive today because of the choice I made while you were busy, holding a line that was already broken. Vess felt the weight of the revelation settle across the bridge like a physical thing. Sylvain said nothing for a long, terrible moment, his jaw working, hands white-knuckled against the console. You erased us, he said finally. You erased 200 years of history, buried an entire species under a lie, and called it mercy. I called it survival, Celine shot back sharper now. There's a difference you never had to learn because you got to sleep through the part where the rest of us had to live with it. And now, Vess cut in, unable to stay silent any longer. If you saved them, why come here to kill him? Why chase this ship across half the sector with a directive strike fleet if all he wants is to find the people you claim to have protected? The silence that followed told Vess she'd struck something true. Because he's not just a soldier who woke up, Celine said finally, her tone shifting into something colder, more clinical. His neural signature was keyed into Haven's original fail-safes before he ever went into stasis. A living key, built to unlock the colony's true coordinates and override its defenses if the original evacuation command line was ever severed. The directive has spent 2 centuries making sure nobody ever finds that key again, buried or awake. Now he's awake, Captain. And the moment word of that reaches the wrong ears in the directive hierarchy, it won't be a strike carrier that comes looking for him. It'll be an extermination order for every ship, every crew, every soul that's touched his path since that pod opened. Solvain's eyes flicked to Vess, something unspoken passing between them. The realization at last of exactly why 5 cruisers had opened fire the instant he'd woken, and why an entire hidden faction had been waiting, patient and armed, for this exact moment. "Come with me," Selene said, her voice softening again, almost pleading now. "I can protect you, Arik. I can protect all of them. Stand down, hand over what you know, and I promise you Haven stays safe, this ship stays alive, and the truth stays buried where it can't hurt anyone else. That's the only ending that doesn't get people killed." For a long moment, Vess genuinely didn't know which way he would choose. Then Solvain's expression hardened into something she recognized now. The same cold clarity from the battle in the nebula, the look of a man who had already made his decision and was only waiting for the moment to act on it. "You buried an entire species to protect a secret," he said quietly. "I woke up to make sure that grave doesn't stay closed." The comm channel cut to static as Selene's strike carrier surged forward, weapons blazing to life across its hull, and the caldera shuddered violently under the opening volley, alarms shrieking through every deck at once. "Brace!" Vess shouted, throwing the crippled ship into a desperate evasive roll, but there was nowhere left to run. Their reactor was bleeding power, their shields fracturing under the strain, and the strike carrier bearing down on them was faster, stronger, and commanded by someone who knew every trick Solvain might try before he tried it. A secondary explosion rocked the engine room, plunging half the ship into darkness, and Dask's voice cracked with real fear for the first time since this had all begun. "Captain, we've lost primary power, reactors failing, we've got minutes before total systems collapse, and directive reinforcements are still inbound from the nebula behind us." In the sudden, flickering dark of the dying bridge, a new signal broke through the chaos, weak and fractured but unmistakably real. The same encrypted distress call from before, closer now, more desperate, pulsing with the raw, unmistakable signature of human life. Solvain went very still, staring at the readout with something breaking open behind his eyes. "That's them," he whispered. "That's Haven. They're alive and they're calling for help." He turned to Vess, voice raw with 200 years of grief and hope colliding all at once. "And I am the only one who ever promised them I'd come." Behind them, Selene's strike carrier closed the final distance, weapons charging for what was clearly meant to be the last shot either ship would need. The reactor had less than 3 minutes left, and Solvain spent the first 30 seconds of them doing something Vess didn't expect at all. He laughed. It was short, exhausted, and utterly without humor, but it was there, cracking through the tension on the dying bridge like a pressure valve releasing. "What?" Vess demanded, bracing against another impact as the strike carrier's weapons found their range. 200 years, Solvain said, already moving, hands flying across a console that flickered in and out with the failing power. "I slept through the end of everything I built my life protecting, and here I am, still making the same choice I made the day I sealed myself into that pod." He glanced up at her, something fierce and clear-eyed replacing the grief from moments before. "We don't run from this, we use it." "Use what?" Dask shouted over the alarms. "We have no shields, no weapons worth mentioning, and a directive commander who knows every move you're going to make before you make it." "She knows the soldier I was," Solvain said. "She doesn't know what I've decided to become since I woke up." He pulled up the ship's long-range comm array, what little remained of it, and began routing every scrap of the caldera's dying power directly into its transmitter. Haven's coordinates have been buried for 2 centuries because the directive built its entire authority on the idea that humanity is gone, silent, harmless, a secret they could control. His hands moved faster. A secret only works as long as it stays a secret. Vess understood in an instant what he intended, and the sheer audacity of it stole her breath. "You're going to broadcast the coordinates, openly, to all of known space. "I'm going to make sure nobody can ever bury us again," Solvane said. "Not the directive, not Celine, not anyone who thinks a species this stubborn can be quietly erased and forgotten. That signal will draw every hostile faction in the sector straight to Haven," Dask warned. "It will also draw everyone else," Solvane said grimly. "Every ally who remembers what humanity meant before the silence. Every old debt, every sympathizer, every soul who never believed the extinction story to begin with." Celine built her secret on the assumption that the galaxy had already decided humanity didn't matter enough to fight for. His eyes hardened. "I intend to prove her wrong. One final time." Outside, Celine's strike carrier bore down on their crippled hull, weapons array glowing white-hot with the charge of a finishing blow. Vess threw the caldera into one last desperate maneuver, buying seconds, only seconds, while Solvane's hands hovered over the final transmission control. "Arik," Celine's voice cut back through the comm, cold now, stripped of every trace of old affection. "Don't do this. You'll unravel 200 years of peace built on that silence. You'll get people killed. People have already been dying in that silence," Solvane said. "Quietly, patiently, for 200 years, while you called it mercy." He looked at Vess one last time, and something passed between them, not command and crew anymore, but two people who had chosen, without ever quite saying it aloud, to trust each other with everything. "Ready?" Vess nodded once. "Do it." Solvane slammed his hand down on the console, and the caldera's failing reactor screamed as every last drop of its power surged into a single desperate broadcast. Haven's true coordinates, the truth of humanity's survival, and Solvane's own voice, raw and unmistakable, carried out across 100 relay points and into the wider dark of known space, faster than anyone could hope to silence it. For one terrible, suspended moment, nothing happened. The strike carrier's weapons fired, and then the sky itself seemed to answer. Ships began dropping out of faster than light all around them. Not directive reinforcements, but a scattered, mismatched fleet of old freighters, aging cruisers, and vessels bearing insignias from a dozen different factions, all responding at once to a signal that had waited 200 years to be heard again. Old allies, sympathizers who had never believed the extinction story, descendants of those who remembered exactly what humanity had once stood for, and had simply been waiting for proof it was worth standing beside again. Celine's parting shot went wide, deflected by the sudden chaotic arrival of a freighter angling itself directly into the blast's path, and her strike carrier, suddenly outnumbered and exposed, was forced into a hard retreat as unfamiliar ships closed in from every direction. On the caldera's dying bridge, alarms finally began to quiet, and through the shattered viewport, Vess watched as, for the first time in 200 years, humanity's name lit up across the open dark of space, not as a monument to extinction, but as a living, breathing, undeniable fact. They reached Haven 3 days later, the caldera limping in on backup power, escorted by a small fleet of allies who had answered the call and simply refused to leave. The hidden colony was nothing like Vess had imagined. Not ruins, not a graveyard, but a quiet, thriving world tucked deep behind 2 centuries of careful secrecy, its people having built an entire life in the silence Selene had bought them. When Solvane stepped off the ship onto Haven soil for the first time, an old woman broke from the gathered crowd before anyone could stop her, tears streaming down a face lined with decades he'd never witnessed, and threw her arms around him like she'd been waiting her entire life for exactly this moment. "You kept the promise," she whispered against his shoulder. "You said you'd come. Even after everyone told us you were gone. Even after 200 years. Some of us never stopped believing you'd come." Solvane held her, this stranger who somehow already felt like family, and understood at last that his sacrifice 200 years ago hadn't been wasted or forgotten. It had been carried forward, quietly, faithfully, by people who refused to let his promise die with him. Vess watched from the ship's ramp as more of Haven's people gathered, children who had grown up on stories of the commander who never made it, elders who remembered the war firsthand, a whole hidden civilization built on the stubborn, unkillable belief that humanity's story wasn't finished yet. Later, standing beside Sylvain as the sun set over a colony that had somehow survived everything thrown against it, Vess finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since the moment she'd cracked open that frozen pod. What happens now? Sylvain looked out at the fleet gathering in Haven's orbit, human ships and alien allies alike, drawn together by a single broadcast, and 2 centuries of buried truth, finally brought back into the light. Now, he said quietly, we make sure nobody ever has to wonder if we're still here again. Behind them, the caldera's ancient systems hummed softly, steady and alive, no longer a relic of a war long lost, but the first ship of something new, proof, carried across 200 years of silence, that humanity had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting patiently for the right moment to come home.